Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I am Michael Brown, here in Langley, British Columbia.
And I'm Stompin' Tom Connors.
You know you're Matthew Stockton. Stop with your Stompin' Tom stuff. We're listening to a lot of Stompin' Tom on the after show, so...
We are.
Because we're covering provinces, and Stompin' Tom loves to sing about a province, so...
He does. Or a town like Tilsonburg.
That's right. Anyway, enough dilly-dallying. Let's get on with the show.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Listener discretion is strongly advised. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We're two ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
On April 2nd, 1885, the tranquil settlement of Frog Lake in what is now Alberta became the scene of a devastating tragedy. Known as the Frog Lake Massacre, this violent episode unfolded during the Northwest Rebellion. 9 settlers, among them government officials, 2 Roman Catholic priests, traders, and a clerk, lost their lives at the hands of a group of Cree warriors led by Wandering Spirit. The attack stemmed from mounting desperation within the Plains Cree community, who faced starvation triggered by the near extinction of buffalo and the inflexible, often cruel administration of Indian Agent Thomas Quinn. While Cree Chief Big Bear advocated for peace and negotiation, tensions within his band and widespread hardship created a perfect storm. The violence not only shocked the young Dominion of Canada, but also shaped the outcome of the Northwest resistance and left a legacy of sorrow and contested memory that resonates to this day. This is Dark Poutine episode 382, the 1885 tragedy at Frog Lake. In the early spring of 1885, Frog Lake was a small settlement sitting near the northern bank of the North Saskatchewan River in what is now eastern Alberta. Surrounded by rolling plains and dense stands of aspen and poplar, this was once bison country. By the 1880s, the buffalo were almost completely gone. The Cree people, who had lived on these lands for generations, were no longer able to hunt the large herds that once sustained their way of life. Instead, they waited for food rations from the federal government. These rations were often spoiled, late, or never arrived at all. Disease, hunger, and anger were setting in.
Yeah, this wasn't about poor logistics. It was control, wasn't it? Right? Hunger wasn't an accident.
No.
It was used as a weapon. And withholding food let Indian agents like Quinn decide who lived decently and who suffered.
Or even who died.
Yeah, and that kind of slow, quiet violence doesn't make headlines, but it breaks people just the same, right? It's just terrible. This is a terrible point in Canada's history.
Very much. The settlers at Frog Lake included traders, a few families, 2 Catholic priests, and Canadian government representatives, including the Indian agent Thomas Quinn. In late 19th century Canada, Indian agents were the central enforcers of federal Indigenous policy. Appointed under the Department of Indian Affairs, these men held wide-ranging authority on reserves. They were responsible for ration distribution, managing treaty payments, monitoring movement off reserves, supervising agriculture, and approving or denying basic requests from First Nations people. In practice, an Indian agent often had total control over a community's food, freedom, and future. The Indian Act of 1876 gave the federal government sweeping powers over Indigenous life. Over time, those powers were concentrated in the position of the Indian agent, who acted as judge, administrator, and enforcer. Historian John L. Tobias described Indian agents as local despots who were expected to supervise the Indian population much like a warden would his prison. Often stationed in remote areas, agents answered only to the department in Ottawa. Higher officials rarely questioned their power. In an 1883 internal report, Indian Affairs Commissioner Edgar Dewdney wrote, "It is necessary that Indian agents have full and unquestioned control in matters of rations, discipline, and the direction of daily affairs." The language reflected a system built to control, not to collaborate. Food rationing became the sharpest tool of domination. After the near extinction of the buffalo, Plains Cree and other indigenous groups were forced to rely on government food aid to survive. The quality and amount of this food were left entirely to the agent's discretion. In Lost Harvests, 1990, historian Sarah Carter writes, "Agents had the power to withhold food, delay it, or restrict it as punishment. Complaints went unresolved and hunger spread." She cites multiple letters from starving communities requesting flour and beef. Many were ignored or returned with warnings. The position bred abuse. Complaints about Indian agents were frequent but rarely acted upon. Many Indigenous leaders described them as arrogant or cruel. In 1885, Cree Chief Big Bear stated in frustration, "I ask food for my people who are dying, and the answer is silence from the agent." The Indian agent Big Bear was referring to was none other than Thomas Quinn, a former telegraph operator turned Indian agent stationed at Frog Lake. He was responsible for administering Treaty 6 obligations to the Cree, including food and supplies. Quinn was known locally for being particularly strict. Survivors later said he denied providing food even when stores were full. In her historical survey, Sarah Carter noted oral testimony from a Cree elder in the Frog Lake area. Quinn told us not to come for flour. If we came again, he said the police would come. Quinn held deep control over local Cree bands, and tensions between him and the Cree had grown over the years. Many reports describe him as rigid, unyielding, and often harsh in his treatment of First Nations people. To the north and east of Frog Lake lay several Cree and Métis camps. Among them was Chief Big Bear's band. Chief Big Bear had long resisted the idea of surrendering land to the government. He warned others that the Crown wouldn't keep its promises, but as starvation and smallpox spread, many of his people signed out of desperation. After he finally signed, power within his band began to slip. Some accused him of being too soft, too slow to act. Big Bear, born Mistahi Masqua around 1825 near Fort Carlton in present-day Saskatchewan, was a Plains Cree chief known for his independence, wisdom, and resistance to colonial pressures. He became chief of his band at age 40 after the death of his father, Black Powder, inheriting a group of over 100 members. In his early years as a leader, Big Bear was recognized for his prowess as a warrior, leading his people in traditional pursuits such as hunting and defending their territory against rivals like the Blackfoot. His leadership style emphasized inclusiveness and the welfare of his entire community. Well into the 1870s, Big Bear maintained a strong desire for freedom, advocating for a nomadic lifestyle dependent on the buffalo and showing deep mistrust of outside interference. He quickly gained respect among other Cree groups for his traditional ways and his ability to unite people. As Canada expanded westward, officials began pressuring First Nations on the Plains to sign treaties. Big Bear stood out as a vocal opponent of Treaty 6, which most prairie chiefs signed in 1876. He foresaw that ceding land and accepting reserve life would erode the Cree way of life. Historian John L. Tobias wrote, Big Bear refused gifts from the Canadian government, recognizing them for what they were, bribes to ease future treaty negotiations. Big Bear said, when we set a fox trap, we scatter pieces of meat all around, but when the fox gets into the trap, we knock him on the head. We want no bait. Let your chiefs come like men and talk to us. For several years, he rode from camp to camp, urging other chiefs not to agree to the treaty and calling for a united Indigenous response. His resistance delayed the government's plans and marked him as a troublemaker in the eyes of settlers and officials. But as the buffalo vanished and starvation became widespread, Big Bear finally signed Treaty 6 in 1882, saying he had no other choice if his people were to survive. Even after signing, his commitment to negotiation rather than confrontation continued to define his leadership in the years before the events at Frog Lake.
And this is how coercion looks in polite language in a lot of ways. No other choice isn't compromise, it's surrender under starvation, right?
Right.
Big Bear resisted for as long as he could, but survival kind of has a way of shutting down idealism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part people forget. Treaties like these weren't really agreements, they were survival ultimatums.
Kind of like tariffs, potentially. They were a bullying tactic, of course. At the same time, another figure was gaining influence. His name was Wandering Spirit. He was a young Cree war chief, angry at white settlers and tired of waiting for Big Bear to act. Wandering Spirit, known in Cree as Ka Pai Pama Chukways, was born around 1845 and rose to become the war chief of Big Bear's band of Plains Cree well before the events at Frog Lake in 1885. Described as tall and lithe, with piercing eyes and a commanding presence, he quickly distinguished himself as a courageous and formidable warrior. His war bonnet, unique among the Cree, was fashioned from an entire lynx skin, looped double. Its design marked him out for both his prowess and his status. According to the Dictionary of Canadian Biography, he attained the prestigious position of war chief, an office separate from the social chieftainship held by Big Bear as a result of his daring battle exploits. He was reputed to have killed between 11 and 13 warriors of the Blackfeet, hereditary enemies of the Crees, more than any other member of the band. As war chief, Wandering Spirit had essential responsibilities within his community. He was not just a military leader, but also head of the Warrior Society, overseeing camp security, enforcing discipline during moves and hunts, and helping to police the band during the large communal buffalo hunts. Summer was the season for his most significant influence as the Warrior Society oversaw the safe migrations and festivities that marked Cree life on the plains. Though respected for his bravery, Wandering Spirit's approach to leadership differed sharply from Chief Big Bear, who sought negotiation and unity. In the years leading up to 1885, as Big Bear's authority slipped under pressure from government rationing and internal divisions, Wandering Spirit grew restless. He and Imasees, Big Bear's son, reportedly vied for greater power. Sometimes when Big Bear was absent, Wandering Spirit would take command and there was tension over the band's direction. Historian R.S. Allen observed that Wandering Spirit's enthusiasm to punish the Cree's oppressors stood in contrast to the caution and experience valued by many, which kept him from becoming the principal leader of the full band. Before the massacre at Frog Lake, most references to Wandering Spirit center on his exploits against the Blackfoot and his growing impatience with the deteriorating conditions faced by Cree communities under Canadian government policy. When rations failed or grievances went unanswered, some young warriors in the band looked increasingly to him for direction. As hunger and frustration built in the winter of 1884 to 85, his authority as war chief became a rallying point for those no longer willing to wait for peaceful solutions. Yet up until the day of the Frog Lake attack, the story of Wandering Spirit remains that of an acclaimed, battle-tested war chief, respected for his skill, restless under colonial pressures, and increasingly willing to take bold action when others hesitated.
Yeah, but when the world keeps showing you that negotiation leads nowhere, eventually someone's going to snap, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Wandering Spirit wasn't born violent. He was made urgent, is the way I'd put it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, when institutions block every peaceful route, people don't radicalize. They get backed into it. It's a different way of looking at it.
That's right. In March 1885, not long before the events at Frog Lake, Louis Riel and his Métis supporters declared a provisional government in Batoche, Saskatchewan. The Northwest Rebellion was beginning. Ottawa sent troops westward. Rumors of war were in the wind. Many settlers left their remote posts. Tensions tightened all along the frontier. For weeks leading up to April, government rations were late again at Frog Lake. Thomas Quinn, according to Cree oral accounts, refused repeated requests for more food. Around this time, Big Bear's authority had fractured. Wandering Spirit began organizing young warriors willing to act on their terms. A Protestant missionary named Reverend John McDougall, who had visited the area, later recalled being told there was hunger. Then talk of revenge. Many were saying Quinn was the one keeping the food from coming. By late March, several settler buildings stood abandoned. Only a few remained at Frog Lake. Those who stayed behind may have believed that the government would protect them. They did not know that a group of Cree warriors, pressured by hunger and anger, would enter the settlement on the morning of April 2nd. Thomas Quinn's choices directly affected the tensions at Frog Lake during the brutal winter of 1884 to 85. As starvation took hold and the chiefs lost authority, resentment toward him grew. Some Cree began to see rebellion as the only path left. From within this climate of anger and need, the figure of Wandering Spirit emerged. The tragedy that followed began in the shadow of the Indian Agent's power. The hills were still wet with melting snow. The settlers made breakfast as the sun rose. They did not see the armed riders gathering just beyond the trees. After a quick break, we'll get into the tragic events of that day and the aftermath. And we are back, Matthew. Thoughts at the halfway point?
Yeah, this moment, when the blood spills and it's complicated, it's easy to focus on the violence, right? On the gunshots, on Quinn falling, on priests dying, but the harder question that we have to ask is, what do you expect people to do after years of being starved, threatened, and dismissed, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not excusing the killings, but I am saying they didn't come from nowhere. This wasn't random savagery, right? It was the consequence of policies written thousands of kilometers away by men who never missed a meal. And If you want peace, you have to make peace. You have to make justice possible. And Canada didn't.
They definitely didn't. As dawn broke on April 2nd, 1885, tension and hunger gripped the small settlement of Frog Lake. Among the Cree, a restless determination had formed. In the early hours, a party of Cree warriors, led by Wandering Spirit, moved quietly through the settlement, targeting key buildings and rounding up white inhabitants. Their first target was, of course, Indian Agent Thomas Quinn. Before sunup, Quinn was taken from his home by a group of armed men. He was escorted with a small but growing group of settlers, traders, government staff, and church officials into the center of the village. At least 24 Cree warriors patrolled the streets, entering buildings to collect weapons and goods. At the same time, other members of Big Bear's band watched with unease, some participating, others standing back. The Catholic mission was a focal point in the settlement, and most of the white settlers, men and women, including some children, were ordered into the church. Reverend Fathers Léon Adelar Fafard and Félix Marchand held the morning mass. There was an air of uncertainty and dread. According to William Bleasdell Cameron, the Hudson's Bay Company clerk who survived to write about the attack, the Indians came among us before Mass and warned us all to keep quiet, to do what we were told. The women wept, the children clung to their mothers. After the church service ended, Wandering Spirit and Imasees, Big Bear's son, herded the group from the chapel and ordered them to move to the Cree camp several kilometers away. Some, including Quinn, refused. Thomas Quinn's resistance was especially notable and fateful. As the Cree pushed the group out of the church, Quinn stood apart. He gave an unequivocal refusal to leave the settlement at their command. Cameron wrote, "He would not move a step, neither with them nor away. He would not be driven, he would not obey. He simply stood defiant. Surviving accounts, including Cameron's, confirm that confrontation gave way to violence. Quinn was shot in the head at close range, the opening gunshot of the massacre. Reports indicate that emissaries may have wounded Quinn with an initial shot, but it was Wandering Spirit who delivered the killing bullet. Wandering Spirit ended his life quickly with a gunshot to the chest, Cameron wrote.
Quinn had been the face of starvation for these people, right?
Right.
And when that moment came, his refusal wasn't noble. This is defiant ignorance, right?
Yeah.
Some people would see it as noble, but it was defiant ignorance. In a room full of tension and weapons, he dared them to pull the trigger, and that kind of arrogance cost lives, his and others.
Yeah, well,
he was arrogant.
He was an arrogant piece of crap. What followed Quinn's death was sudden and chaotic. Panic gripped the cluster of settlers, some pleading, others attempting to run or shield loved ones. Big Bear reportedly rushed from a building to stop the violence. William Bleasdale Cameron remembered. As well might he have shouted at the wind. His authority failed in the moment. Gunfire cracked across the clearing. 8 more men died within minutes. Priests Fafard and Marchand, farming instructor John Delaney, sawmill operator John Gowanlock, lay assistant John Williscroft, clerk William Gilchrist, trader George Dill, and carpenter Charles Guan. Bodies fell near the church, the mission, and along the road as shots rang out. Cameron reported that some were killed instantly, others tried to run, but there was no escape. Inside the settlement, the killings were swift but not indiscriminate. Some accounts recall Cree women intervening to shield would-be victims. Cameron himself survived by hiding beneath the shawl of a Cree woman as chaos broke out. I crouched under the blanket, my heart in my throat, scarcely breathing, he later wrote. After a tense hour, Cree warriors checked the buildings for more settlers. When the order returned, the survivors were rounded up. The numbers were substantial. About 70 settlers and Métis were spared, including the wives of Gowanlock and Delaney, Teresa Gowanlock and Teresa Delaney, as well as their children. Teresa Gowanlock recalled in her memoir of being pulled away by an Indigenous man after her husband was shot. She recalled she was still looking back to where my poor husband was lying dead. The Indian motioned to where he was going to take me, and on we went. I thought my heart would break. I would rather have died with my husband and been at rest.
Okay, so that's raw and it's human, right? And I feel bad for her, but it's also the voice of someone who has never taught sort of the full context, right?
Yep.
She didn't see Cree grief or loss or fear. She saw monsters.
Right.
And that doesn't excuse her language, but it does explain how stories get stuck in one frame for generations. Right?
Her language gets worse later on.
Yeah.
The terror and confusion for the survivors lasted well beyond the gunfire. The Cree group, led by Wandering Spirit and joined by others, took the women, children, and remaining settlers captive and marched them from Frog Lake toward their camp. The personal accounts of the captives, some of whom would later write memoirs, describe a grim scene. Bodies lying unburied on the settlement grounds as they walked away. Louis Goulet and other Métis intervened, purchasing the safety of the widows and moving them under protection. That afternoon and into the next day, the settlement was left silent and empty, except for the dead. The Cree looted the Hudson's Bay Post and government stores for supplies, torching many of the buildings.
As I get older, right, I realize that you need to understand what led up to things.
Right.
And this wasn't lawlessness, it was reclaiming. When a system robs you for years and then falls apart, what's left behind isn't just goods, it's everything you were denied. So you can call it looting if you want, but to those who were starving, it looked like justice.
Yeah.
Finally showing up for them. We can actually get all the stuff that was taken away from us.
Exactly, and that's the way I feel about it too. And burning many of the buildings, I mean, those buildings are representative of the system that's trying to crush you. Yeah, burn them down. The captives, including Cameron and the 2 Teresas, began a long ordeal of forced marches, hunger, and uncertainty. For the next 2 months, they would remain within Big Bear's camp, subject to shifting moods, sometimes protected by camp leaders, at other moments threatened by young warriors who saw them as bargaining chips for the rebellion's demands. Teresa Gowanlock loathed her captors and wrote in her memoir the next year, "The language throughout her writings is sometimes shockingly racist." She wrote of the massacre's aftermath, "During the 2 days which had passed, the bodies of the men that were murdered had not been buried. They were lying on the road exposed to the view of everyone. The half-breeds carried them off the road to the side, but the Indians coming along dragged them out again. It was dreadful to see the bodies of our poor dear husbands dragged back and forth by those demonic savages. Permission was sought and granted by Big Bear to bury some of the dead. The mass grave was hurriedly dug in the cemetery near the mission, where a cairn now stands to commemorate those killed. The memorial reads, here on 2nd April 1885, rebel Indians under Big Bear massacred Reverend Father Léon Adelard Fafard, Reverend Father Félix Marchand, Indian Agent Thomas Quinn, and others. Eyewitness memories of the massacre converge on its suddenness and the fracture lines within the Cree camp. Big Bear, positioned as a peace seeker, tried to stop the violence. Testimonies from Cameron and later from Métis witnesses suggest he had little authority in the moment. Henry Ross Halpin, another hostage, later served as Big Bear's secretary in captivity. He wrote that Big Bear looked deeply troubled that day, but the young men would not listen. Physical details from survivor accounts reveal the horror left in the settlement's wake. Cameron, after his later return to Frog Lake, described houses burned to cinders, personal belongings and church items strewn across the ground, and the dead hurriedly buried with the help of Métis and Cree, who opposed the violence. Not all those present were involved in the shooting. Some members of the camp did their best to protect the captives. Others looked the other way, focused on survival. Later that month, oral history remembered that the survivors were allowed to eat, to rest, and even to pray, though always under armed guard. News of the violence at Frog Lake traveled quickly. Telegraph wires carried stark reports from the prairies to Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. In the cities of eastern Canada, newspapers soon featured headlines describing a massacre and the deaths of government officials, priests, and settlers. The Canadian government, already alert due to earlier unrest at Duck Lake, responded with outrage. An account from militaryhistory.ca describes the effect. The Frog Lake Massacre sent shockwaves through the Canadian government and settler communities. The killing of settlers and government officials was seen as an unprovoked atrocity, galvanizing public opinion against the Cree and strengthening the government's resolve to suppress the rebellion. John A. Macdonald's cabinet saw the event not simply as a crime, but as a threat to all white settlement in the West, one that could not go unanswered.
Yeah, and this is the turning point, not just in this script, in this story, but in history. One morning of violence became the excuse for years of punishment. And the irony here is that nobody in power asked why it happened.
No.
The narrative locked in fast. Savage attack, innocent victims, heroic crackdown. But the reality is way messier than that. And there was blame on both sides, but only one side ever got heard. And that's what we keep forgetting. When grief and fear write the headlines, truth rarely makes the final edit, right?
The captives from Frog Lake, about 70, including women and children, endured an ordeal that lasted weeks. After the attack, they were taken by Cree warriors to the encampment outside the settlement, where they remained under guard. Some Cree women hid prisoners to protect them from harm, as they did with William Cameron. According to Teresa Gowanlock, the hostages were hungry, cold, and never knew what the next day would bring. Rations were scarce. Métis intermediaries made attempts to keep the captives fed and safe. Big Bear, upon retaking authority within his band, made efforts both to protect the captives and to maintain some restraint. Homesick and frightened, the hostages watched as the settlement they had known was burned on April 4th, with only the bell tower and cemetery left standing. Within the Cree camp itself, the aftermath was marked by division and despair. Big Bear, who had not sanctioned the attack and arrived only after the deaths, struggled to reassert moral and practical authority over the warriors and his son Amasis. Historian John Tobias wrote, "For Big Bear, the massacre was a disaster. Although he had not sanctioned the violence and was not present during the attack, he was held responsible as the leader of the Cree involved." The Cree and Métis band then left Frog Lake for Fort Pitt, taking the captives with them. As Cameron recalled, Big Bear looked deeply troubled that day, but the young men would not listen. The leadership was fractured. Young warriors looked to Wandering Spirit. Big Bear's attempts at negotiation with the government failed amidst demands for unconditional surrender. The gruesome news of the massacre had made Ottawa unwilling to offer terms. Law enforcement and government responses were immediate and severe. The Northwest Mounted Police and Militia mobilized rapidly. Major General Thomas Bland Strange organized the Alberta Field Force while more troops came by train and steamer from eastern Canada. Settler fears, stoked by headlines, led to calls for swift retribution.
And just like that, the headlines do their job.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody asks what led to the massacre. Nobody asks about Quinn's role or the starvation. And it becomes about vengeance, not understanding. Fear writes fast, doesn't it? And once it starts, the rest is just logistics, right? It's like there was a whole, everyone knew what they were doing, and the papers knew what they were doing. It was a whole system to keep people down.
Yep. The Midland Battalion, the police, and militia swept westwards, burying the dead and hunting for the perpetrators. As one regional historian wrote, the government undertook at that time a most thorough investigation, and the Indians who took active part were all brought to judgment. The military response to the events at Frog Lake was massive and intended to make an example. The federal government deployed the Northwest Field Force, commanded by Major General Frederick Middleton, with 3 main columns formed to suppress the wider Northwest resistance. According to the Canadian Department of Militia's report, these columns included local militias, mounted police, and reserve units from eastern Canada. Middleton's force divided its attention between quashing the Métis near Batoche and tracking down the Cree bands now moving north from Frog Lake and Fort Pitt.
So the government brought thousands of men, weapons, rail cars to crush a people already weakened by famine.
Yeah.
It wasn't just to end the rebellion. This is to make a statement that no one, not even a war chief with nothing left, could defy the system and survive it. That's what the message was.
Yeah. By mid-April, Wandering Spirit and his group had moved on from Frog Lake, joining other rebels in threatening Fort Pitt. Big Bear tried, without success, to restrain further violence. After a tense standoff, the mounted police at Fort Pitt, commanded by Inspector Francis Dickens, chose to withdraw rather than risk another massacre, leaving the remaining civilians to Cree custody. The police retreated down the North Saskatchewan River to Battleford. The Cree then moved steadily north and east, evading the pursuing militia. Government columns pursued the Cree across the plains. At each abandoned camp, burned structures and looted supplies marked Big Bear's passage. On several occasions, Big Bear attempted to negotiate or surrender if his people's safety could be guaranteed. But with the rebellion seen as an open insurrection, the authorities insisted on unconditional surrender. The fighting culminated at Frenchman's Butte and later at Loon Lake. The Cree bands, outnumbered and exhausted, could not maintain resistance. By late spring, most had surrendered or been captured. The fate of the captives from Frog Lake varied. Some, including the Gowanlock and Delaney widows, were released through Métis mediation.
Yeah, and I think that part doesn't get told enough. Like, the Métis were often the bridge between sort of these two worlds.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't always have the power, but they didn't often have the power, but they had proximity.
Yeah, they were closer to both sides, yeah.
A bit of a bridge, and in moments like this, it used to save lives. That's resistance too, sort of Métis mediation. It's quieter.
Yeah. Some hostages endured the full period of captivity, eventually released after the fighting ended. William Cameron survived to write an account of his captivity, expressing relief and grief in equal measure. The government's pursuit of legal retribution was as rigorous as its military campaign. 6 Cree men, as well as 2 others involved in violence near Battleford, were arrested and held for trial. The 6 men tied to the Frog Lake Massacre were Kepepama Chukways, Wandering Spirit, convicted for the murder of Indian Agent Thomas Quinn; Papamiki Sik, Walking the Sky, for the killing of Catholic priest Père Fafard; Manchus, Bad Arrow, for the death of Charles Gouin, interpreter to Agent Quinn; Kit Ahwa Kani, Miserable Man, also charged in Gouin's murder; Napes, Iron Body, and Apischas Kus, Little Bear, both charged with the killing of traitor George Dill. The 2 additional men came from outside Big Bear's community. Itka, Crooked Leg, was convicted for the murder of a farm instructor named Payne, and Way Wanich, Man Without Blood, for slaying rancher Tremont near Battleford. Trials were held between September and October 1885, conducted by Charles Borromée Rouleau, the resident stipendiary magistrate of the Northwest Territories. Rouleau, whose own family home had been looted earlier during the violence, presided over the trials with little sign of leniency. As historian Bill Wazer noted in his 2016 book A World We Have Lost, the trials were rushed and clearly political, meant to demonstrate the power of state justice over Indigenous disorder.
Yeah, and there's no pride in that. It's shame, right? So 8 men hanged in a line, not for justice, but for optics.
Mm-hmm.
And, the Crown didn't want to end the rebellion. They wanted to bury the idea of resistance altogether.
Yeah, this is what you get if you resist us. Yep.
This was not justice. This was a PR move to go, don't F with us.
Yep. On November 27, 1885, just after sunrise, 8,000 pounds of wood and iron stood assembled in the barracks square of Fort Battleford, a gallows platform 10 feet high, 20 feet long, built to carry out the grim task. Gathered in silent formation beneath it were civilians, clergy, the Northwest Mounted Police, and a group unlikely to forget the moment, the children of the Battleford Industrial School. The students, all Indigenous, were brought out that morning to watch the hangings at close range. The reason was clear: a warning.
Yeah, so state-sponsored trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So what they're doing here is trying to force generational obedience.
Yeah.
With these ropes.
Yeah. The scene unfolded with military precision. At 8 a.m., the prisoners, their hands tied behind their backs and each flanked by 4 policemen, were led from their cells through the post. They walked slowly toward the gallows. A group of clergymen, the interpreter, and the executioner Hodson accompanied them. The sound of shuffling boots was the only noise. Eyewitness accounts say the condemned men were calm and sang Cree death songs up to the scaffold. One by one, they were led up the stairs through a gate in the railing. A rope waited for each man. Once on the platform, their ankles were strapped. The sheriff offered them each the chance to speak. All but Wandering Spirit did. Some reportedly prayed, some cursed. One gave a defiant speech about the suffering of his people. Then the black hoods were drawn down, the ropes were adjusted, the trapdoor mechanism grated and dropped. 8 Indigenous men fell together, their bodies swinging. The death was instant for some, longer for others. The official coroner, P.G. Laurie, examined the bodies. No families were present to claim them. Each man was placed into a rough box. The 8 were buried together in a mass grave dug into a hill not far from the Northwest Mounted Police barracks facing the river. No cross marked the spot, no names recorded on a monument. For many years, the location vanished from memory.
God, and it's just shocking how all of this is so intentional, right? This is how you try to erase this story.
Yeah.
You bury 8 men without names. You skip the memorial, and you hope the dirt will do the forgetting for you, right?
Yeah.
But it didn't, because families remember.
Yeah.
And now researchers are remembering too, and that silence is finally cracking.
Yeah. That mass grave remained undiscovered for generations. But in the last few decades, renewed interest in the events of 1885 and access to historical plans of the fort sparked new inquiry. Students and researchers, tracing old layouts and oral histories, found the approximate site. This rediscovery has triggered reflection on what the hangings meant, not just as a justice issue, but as a tool of state violence and colonial discipline. The choice to publicly execute Indigenous men in front of residential school students was not incidental. Government officials believed that an overt show of punishment would deter further rebellion. It was meant to break the spirit of resistance. Dr. J.R. Miller, a historian of Indigenous settler relations, called it a deliberate act of psychological warfare. It symbolized the full might of the Canadian government brought down on the heads of First Nations who dared to resist. Chief Big Bear was eventually tried and sentenced to prison, although he was released early due to failing health. After his release, Big Bear moved to live on the Little Pine, also referred to as Poundmaker, Reserve in Saskatchewan. He was deeply affected by the loss of his traditional way of life and the difficulties facing his people. Refusing medical aid and described as visibly crushed by disillusionment and declining health, Big Bear died on the reserve on January 17, 1888, at the age of 62. He was buried in the Roman Catholic cemetery on the Poundmaker Reserve.
Yeah, you have to remember, he gave everything to avoid violence.
Mm-hmm.
He signed the treaty. He tried to protect the captives, but Canada didn't want leaders like him. They wanted obedience. And what crushed him in the end wasn't just old age, but it was being forced to watch his people's dignity get stripped away piece by piece.
Yeah. Of those involved, only Wandering Spirit was never disputed as a principal actor. He did not deny his role, stating, "I did the killing because I was made angry. I could not help it. My heart was bad that day." The legacy of the Frog Lake events is complicated and still felt. For the families of settlers killed, the massacre left scars and memories passed down through generations. Prairie Town monuments memorialize the dead, and the site remains marked by stone and plaque. For the Cree, the aftermath was much heavier. The Cree communities in the region lost leaders, saw many members imprisoned or hanged, and spent years subject to even stricter rationing, reserve regulations, and surveillance. Reserve life became more restrictive. According to John Tobias, the rebellion as a whole resulted in the increased militarization of the Canadian West and the further erosion of Indigenous autonomy. The reserve system became even more restrictive, and the government tightened its control over rations and movement.
Yeah, and there it is. The aftermath wasn't healing, it was a clampdown. More patrols, more ration rules, more fences. The government didn't just try to punish it, doubled down. And, it shaped the system Indigenous communities still have to navigate now.
Yeah. Eric Large, a descendant of Frog Lake survivors, has described the impact at commemorations. All along it has been one-sided. It is time our story was told. As the events were remembered and retold, Indigenous historians and community members have worked to correct the record, focusing on the broken treaties, the suffering caused by lost buffalo and neglect, and the complexity of Cree efforts to resist starvation and preserve their people. There are also persistent questions about the official record, especially concerning the trials and executions. Some contemporary Cree researchers continue to challenge the completeness and accuracy of government files from 1885. The Asamoan Opaspio Society has taken up new research to ensure Indigenous voices are heard. As CBC reported ahead of the 140th anniversary, many now gather to mark the event not only with mourning but with renewed insistence. The telling of the story must be done with sensitivity to both sides and must correct a long record of misunderstanding and exclusion. Today, the site of Frog Lake stands as a National Historic Site, its scars visible but its story still evolving. For some, it is a place of loss. For others, it is a place to remember Cree resistance and a warning of what starvation and injustice can bring. As the Encyclopedia of Saskatchewan notes, the massacre also deepened the stigma against Indigenous peoples, reinforcing negative stereotypes and justifying further government control over their lives. The massacre remains a stark reminder of the human cost of colonial expansion and the systemic injustices faced by Indigenous peoples during Canada's westward expansion." End quote.
And that's the final cost, right? Not just lives lost. So in a way, in the grand history of things, it's just 8 men, right? Mm-hmm. But what's even, and I don't mean that like I respect all human life, but longer term, it's about identities distorted. Yeah. It's how one desperate act became the lens through which a whole people were judged. And that stain has lasted generations, and it still does, right? And the only way to clean it isn't with denial, it's with honesty and shows like this.
Reflections by survivors, especially Cameron, shaped how future generations remembered the massacre. His book Blood Red the Sun recounts his fear and his eventual rescue, describing how little he understood at the time about the desperation that had fueled the attack. As historian John Chappett summarized, the 9 deaths at Frog Lake on that April morning were born not out of coherent rebellion but from the collapse of hope under conditions no people should have endured.
And that's a great way to end this show, because that's the sentence that sticks. Collapse of hope. This wasn't a war of ambition. It was a scream from people who had run out of options, right? That scream is still echoing. Mm-hmm. And maybe if we listen, we'll stop repeating it.
Yeah, maybe.
I doubt it, though.
And that's it for Dark Poutine episode 382. the 1885 tragedy at Frog Lake. That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week. All right, we have some voicemails, Matthew.
Great.
Let's do this.
Hi, Mike and Matthew. This is Adele from Kitchener, Ontario, with a story that happened this past February. My best friend was recovering from recent heart surgery, and I'd been driving her to appointments and so on. Normally, she'd ride in the back seat behind me, and she'd stuff a pillow between the seat belt and her chest to protect her incision. Now, on this particular afternoon, I picked her up from emergency, where she'd been admitted with chest pain during the previous night. After hours of testing, she was told her heart was fine, but that she had developed pneumonia, and she could go home with a script for some really strong antibiotics. But before being discharged, the nurse gave her the first dose, even though my friend hadn't eaten that day. This was not a good plan, but we were both kind of flustered and intent on getting home after a grueling time in emergency. We're about halfway home when she realized that she had forgotten her pillow. I couldn't follow everything she was saying since she was sitting behind me and I was concentrating on driving in rush hour in the snow, but the gist of the conversation seemed to be what she could use instead of a pillow to protect her chest. I did hear her ask if I had a bag or something, and still thinking of a pillow substitute, I tossed my hat into the back seat. It was a wool, pink, hand-knitted hat that I loved, and my friend grabbed it and promptly threw up into it, thanks to the antibiotic on an empty stomach. So now instead of telling you to go shit in your hat, I'm now going to say that you can go puke in your toque. Love the show, and I love both you guys. Cheers.
Adele from Kitchener, you rock.
Adele, that is such a good story.
Oh, I hope your friend is okay now.
Go puke in your toque.
Go puke in your toque. Oh, that's so funny.
Adele liked that hat, you can tell.
Yeah, she was disturbed by that. But you know, what does Adele do for a living there in Kitchener, Matthew?
Oh, Adele doesn't have to do anything. She's just Adele.
Okay.
Yeah, she's like driving friends to the hospital, stuff like that.
Good for her, yeah.
Adele just knows how to. She just lives.
Adele sounds like someone I want to have a cup of coffee with.
Absolutely, I'd totally have a coffee with Adele.
Yeah. Alrighty, here's another.
Hi, Mike and Matthew. It's been a while since I called. This is Sarah in Florida, and I'm not going to lie, Matthew, it hurt my feelings a little bit when you accused me of working for SpaceX. That is not my job. But I got over it anyway. I'm calling because I've got a cousin who lives in Massachusetts, and she was telling me about this cool book that was introduced to her. It's like a journal, basically, or an autobiography of a fella by the name of Philip Ashton, who was a fisherman from Nova Scotia, and in 1722, he was kidnapped by pirates. Now I'm blanking on the name of the pirate. Ned something that's short. You'll find it. You're brilliant like that. I should have prepared for this phone call better. So anyway, he gets abducted by pirates and, is forced to be a mate. And while they're in Honduras, in like the Roatan Islands in the Caribbean, he's able to make an escape. The pirates stick around for like 5 days trying to find him. Eventually they give up. And he spent almost 3 years living on this island, essentially uninhabited island, essentially by himself. Occasionally dudes that were fleeing from the Spaniards would show up. And, so that got him some like flint rock, and I think somebody gave him a pistol one time, things that helped him survive for 3 years, because in the first 5 months, he was horribly attacked by a boar and had to climb up a tree after, getting like his leg injured. Fascinating story, really interesting. I think you guys would tell this story really well. So, short story long, as I am wont to do. Be safe out there in the big wide world. I'm sorry on behalf of, whoever would apologize to you, you lovely Canadian people. There should be, about 6 billion people and whatever. And go take a shit in your hats. Take care.
Holy smokes.
Did you find Ned's last name?
Ned? No, I didn't look up Ned's last
Flanders.
name.
We'll
Ned
say it was Flanders.
Hidley, hiddly, hodley.
So I'm so sorry, Sarah, for saying that you worked at SpaceX. We all know that you actually work at Tesla.
Oh, no. Oh, damn.
Fighting words.
I saw a Tesla the other day with one of those stickers that said, I bought this before I knew he was crazy.
Yeah, and I said you worked at SpaceX before I knew he was crazy, Sarah.
Yeah. But anyway. Well, thank you, Sarah. So here's something interesting, Matthew, and everybody else. Philip Ashton, the name stood out to me. Do you know why?
Why?
That's my brother's name. My brother is Philip Ashton.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, my youngest brother, Phil, a.k.a. Baltic T-Wharf Rat, is named Philip Ashton, which is just kind of mind-boggling to me. That the person essentially who probably, inspired some interesting castaway stories, Anyway, that's really cool. I kind of want to tell that story. He was taken by pirates while fishing near the coast of Shelburne, Nova Scotia. That's the South Shore where I'm from. It's really fascinating. Anyway, thank you so much, and enjoy your job at Tesla. Oh no. Let's move on to our last voicemail.
Hi guys, this is Kelly calling from. Actually, I'm in Maine, the United States, but I'm from Rhode Island, the United States. I listen to your podcast all the time. Totally love it. You guys had me at the first episode when you said quote, end quote, rather than quote, unquote, which is the proper way to say it. And that makes me happy to hear it. So thanks for letting me call and leave a message. Love your episodes and have a nice day. Matthew, take it away.
There you go.
First of all, I thought Rhode Island was in Maine. I didn't know there.
No, it's not. It's an actual state, Matthew. It's the smallest state in the Union, I believe.
I thought Rhode Island was an island in Maine, but anyway,
I've been to both places. I can verify that it is not in Maine.
A linguistics professor.
A linguistics
professor. From Rhode Island, Maine.
From Rhode Island, Maine, I'm a linguistics professor. Oh, well, thank you so much. Yes, quote, end quote. I do. Like, some people do say unquote, and I'm like, what the hell is that? Anyway.
Well, isn't unquote like saying the opposite of what you just quoted? I'm going to respond with an unquote.
Yeah, I don't know. End quote just sounds better. It you start quote. Or I could say open quote, close quote. You could say that, but I like quote, end quote. Anyway, I say it a lot, so I'm glad somebody likes it. That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome. Yes, we're moving on, and we do have a PayPal donut money donor. It is somebody who has donated to us before.
Yay!
And that person is our good friend, Jennifer Hesse. Jen. And Jen says, just a little happy birthday donut money. Enjoy. Gee, whose birthday is it actually tomorrow as of this recording, Matthew?
Yours.
Mine. I'm on the downhill slide to 60 years old. Holy smokes.
You're 56.
I'm 56. I'm in my mid-50s. Oy, 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 oy.
Where did it all go wrong?
I guess next year will be my late 50s. Help. Help me. Anyway, thank you, Jen. We know Jen has been a vice principal, and I think she's between jobs now, which is interesting. What does Jen do for a living now, Matthew? What's she doing to make ends meet?
Stormtrooper.
She's a stormtrooper for ICE, perhaps?
No, for
Star Wars?
Yeah.
Oh, like is she put on the outfit and all that kind of stuff and stomps
She's a stormtrooper. You know
she's a little short for a stormtrooper. That's a line from Star Wars about Luke Skywalker. Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper? Han Solo says. I am such a nerd when it comes to Star Wars.
I'm sad I not brought it up.
Yes, you should be. Thanks, Jen.
Can you hear Steve snoring?
I can. Yeah. Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or interact using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. And that's it for this episode of Dark Poutine. So until next time, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Goodbye.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.